Haqqaajangaatji qiyaanani jugnieriarturluji maavat kasinaaqqutllraatnun uinga qaltayyaugo ilanka magut uitalriit angeqqaq jaligiuriaq unnoomak plugiqaatartugut 9/11 aamak Iraq amuklu jali Afghanistaanamak nallunrittaanani uitallruujirpunak 9/11 aami kitak ayagnirnaartugut. Before we get into the topic, imagine it's a regular Tuesday on September 11, 2001, 9 a.m. until it wasn't. A plane crashed into the North Tower, then not long after it crashed into the South Tower.
Let's start off with the 9/11 incident, shall we? The September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack where two planes crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in D.C. began a series of events that led to the two longest wars in U.S. history. First, the Iraq War began with false claims that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and that Saddam Hussein was supporting Al-Qaeda. The second war in Afghanistan was allegedly about the response to the 9/11 incident to wage a necessary war of self-defense. So these three major events have shaped recent events and the United States forever. And discussing all three events is necessary. It is important now because the incident changed how the United States functions now because they are more secure and always prepared. And we are going to discuss all of the important events.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, terrorists of Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial planes in a strategically planned attack against the United States. When the first plane struck, there were an estimated 17,400 people in the towers. Nobody survived above the impact zone in the North Tower, but in the impact zone in the South, 18 managed to escape and survive. There were about 19 terrorists who hijacked commercial planes. They killed 2,977 people total. After that incident, the federal government moved to quickly develop a security framework to protect our country from large-scale works, while enhancing federal, state, and local security capabilities to prepare to respond to and recover from threats and disasters. What were your thoughts when you first heard about the 9/11 incident? Hey, Trenton. Who was responsible for Al-Qaeda? Or who was the leader?
The people that were responsible was Al-Qaeda led by Osama bin Laden. And the terrorists themselves, there were 19 total terrorists that hijacked the planes. Some of the terrorists went to the U.S. a couple years before it happened so they could go to flight school. All of the terrorists somehow slipped into the U.S. and stayed illegally.
When the 9/11 incident occurred, the country was shocked, confused, and sorrowful. They had a desire to prevent similar events in the future, and in response, the engineers would have to make buildings more secure and resistant to external threats and incorporate new safety features for those inside the building. Over the past 20 years, studies have shown that attacks from the World Trade Center and the Pentagon attacks have led to improvements in fire-resistant, redundant exits, hardening of fire suppression systems, and the placement of emergency escape masks for people in the building, and response plans to launch massive research and rescue operations.
The changes after 9/11 were significant. After the 9/11 incident, a lot has changed. For instance, the emphasis of American immigration law enforcement became border security and removing criminals to protect the nations from terrorist attacks. At the same time, the United States retained its commitment to welcoming lawful immigrants and supporting their assimilation and participation in American civic culture. The culture of the United States succeeding the attacks is noted for heightened security and an increased demand thereof, as well as paranoia and anxiety regarding future terrorist attacks that include most of the nation.
What questions still remain about 9/11's impact? Two questions that still remain are the long-term impact of 9/11 and the extent of the Bush administration knowledge and response. Why do you guys think this event is important to this day? There are still questions to this day like, how would it be today if 9/11 incident never happened? Who knows?
An employee survivor of the 9/11 began her evacuation on the 87th floor of the North Tower after experiencing what felt like an earthquake and smelling jet fuel. She began her descent with colleagues and reached the street level just as the South Tower collapsed.
We are gonna have a short break. We'll be back in a moment. The invasion of Afghanistan. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan in October 2001 primarily to dismantle Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization responsible for the September 11 attacks, which were planned and executed from Afghanistan. The Taliban, which had ruled Afghanistan since 1996, refused to hand over Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda's leader, and other Al-Qaeda's leaders, and also refused to shut down Al-Qaeda's training camps. This refusal prompted the U.S. to launch Operation Enduring Freedom, a military campaign aimed at destroying Al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power.
The only reason why the United States invaded Afghanistan was to wage a necessary war of self-defense, following the Taliban's repeated refusal to expel bin Laden and his associates and end its support for international terrorism. The United States and its coalition partners began a military campaign on October 7, 2001 that targeted terrorist facilities and Taliban military and political assets.
Just ask yourself this. Why do you think this caused so much controversy back then?
The war in Afghanistan, which began in 2001, faced a magnitude of challenges, creating difficulties in its stated goals of establishing a stable and secure Afghanistan. These challenges span various aspects of the conflict, including military and security challenges, political and governance challenges, socio-economic challenges, regional dynamics, and international support and commitment.
Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003?
Along with Iraq's elite development of weapons of mass destruction, another justification for invasion was the purported link between Saddam Hussein and government and terrorist organizations, in particular Al-Qaeda. In that sense, the Bush administration cast Iraq as part of the broader war on terrorism. The U.S. tried to disarm Iraq, but in 2003, President Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair said that Iraq was trying to stop the inspections that had proscribed weapons.
Bush claimed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction such as chemical, biological, and nuclear bombs. Also, Bush claimed that Iraq was linked to the Al-Qaeda terrorists that committed the 9/11 terrorist attacks. These claims turned out to be false. What happened during and after the war?
The U.S. set up a democracy, however, it did not have support of many of the people of Iraq because it was seen as U.S. controlled. So the U.S. had to fight a guerrilla war in the hills and mountains for 8 years against several terrorist organizations. This led to thousands of U.S. military deaths and billions spent on a war that did not accomplish its goal.
Second Gulf War. The Gulf War left policymakers with a dilemma that plagued successive U.S. administrations. The war helped create an acute humanitarian crisis in Iraq. And the United States struggled to find a way to contain supporters of Saddam Hussein while alleviating the suffering of innocent Iraqis.
All these events happened because of the incident during 9/11, and because of that, the United States responded by going to war with Iraq and Afghanistan. And to top that, they eliminated Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. It's kind of crazy that the Afghanistan war lasted about 20 years, right? That's ludicrous.
Subscribe to Jack Jagalok Bed Kieman YouTube me.